Hey everyone, welcome back to the Earnest Medicine podcast. We have a DC local in the studio today, somebody who has actually been connected to us through a mutual friend or acquaintance, Roger Smith. Have to get that guy on this podcast at some point. He's an interesting character.
Yes,
absolutely.
Any episodes?
Yes,
for sure.
And unfortunately, Roger had a little shoulder injury recently, and that would be interesting to follow that recovery process, I think, with him, because he's a manual laborer kind of guy, and when your body gets hurt as a manual laborer, that's a big obstacle to kind of overcome.
And, family and everything, all the regular activities, it's challenging for
Yes,
sure.
sir. Yes, sir. Absolutely. But I wanted to read off Laurie's introduction, and then we'll turn it over to her to kind of give you some of the backstory, and we'll dive in here because there's so much incredible and extremely motivational stuff to talk about with Laurie. But Laurie Strongin is the founder and CEO of Hope for Henry Foundation, based here, right in Washington, D.C., in the nation's capital. Hope for Henry's mission is to incentivize kids to take all the steps necessary to undergo MRIs, lumbar punctures, IV placements, and other tough procedures that can be especially frightening for young kids. By leveraging the power of behavioral economics, the Super Rewards program engages the children in their care and nudges them to make good decisions with their health care. With the Super Rewards, critical medical procedures happen more quickly and seamlessly with fewer risks and lower costs. This is Laurie Strongin. Welcome to Earnest Medicine. So welcome back to the Earnest Medicine podcast. I'm going to turn it over to Laurie, and we'll dive in here with a little bit of origin and learn more about what she does and the mission of Hope for Henry and how it's helping kids around the country and around the world. So here is Laurie Strongin.
So I remember at the moment of parenthood, back on October 25th, 1995, so years ago at this point, thinking what is it going to be like to meet this little baby? And how do you even put a diaper on or a little t-shirt on? I had no experience.
He was your first.
He was my first. And I had no experience with parenting. I was pretty young, 30, and none of my friends had kids yet.
Wow.
And so I was excited, and I'm an adventurous person, so I thought, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'll figure it out. And I had a C-section because he was breech. And the doctors delivered him, and I was lying there sort of behind a surgical sheet. And they went to hand him to me and my husband so we could meet what we learned was a boy. So Henry, we knew he was going to be Henry if he was a boy. And we all noticed simultaneously just a little extra flap of skin on his thumb. Because he's they're wrapped up in a blanket like this, right?
Tight, yeah.
And he had really great APGAR scores, a 9 and a 10. So it seemed like everything was fine. But then they took him away really quickly. So I didn't get to hold him. I didn't really get to look in his eyes.
Yeah.
And they took him to the neonatal intensive care unit, the NICU, and wheeled me down the hallway to my room.
To recover.
From my surgery, because C-section's a intense surgery,
Yes.
As I now know 3 times over. And a few hours later, a doctor came in my room, and people were sending me flowers, and friends were coming to visit. It was exciting because none of us had kids yet.
Of course.
And this stranger comes into my room, and he has a serious look on his face. So we excused our friends, and he introduced himself. He was the head of cardiology at Children's National. And he said, I just want to explain to you that Henry has a heart defect called tetralogy of Fallot. And he took out an illustration of a healthy heart and a heart with tetralogy of Fallot. And honestly, my background in public relations and my husband's in marketing, we didn't know the difference. We had no idea which was the healthy heart and which was the damaged heart. But he said to us, that he's going to need to have open heart surgery when he gets to be around 12 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
He was 5 pounds when he was born.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I think you're in the wrong room.
Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
because you had all the prenatal workup and things were being followed.
Yeah.
And so
yes.
this was a surprise.
It was a total shock.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we knew he was small.
Yeah.
And we knew he was breech. So I'm sure that the doctors delivered him a couple weeks early.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody thought
Yeah.
that there was anything like this going on. And so we knew, like they said, what if he turns blue when you're at home, go to the ER and they'll put a stent in. And my husband and I were both like, what
do you
is
mean?
blue?
Yeah.
Like, what's blue? And he pointed to something that was the color of your shirt.
Oh my gosh.
That is blue. Okay.
Scary.
And 2 days later, they sent us home. And the head of genetics had come in to look at him because why is he small? Now he has this like flap of skin on his thumb and he has tetralogy. Usually this is connected through a syndrome. I'm sure
Yes.
you know that. Yeah. And he said everything else looked fine. He was just going to test for something so rare that he didn't want to bother us with the name. He thought Henry was not typical of that disease and didn't want to worry us.
Yes.
So 2 weeks later, we're at home with Henry, and he is just a beautiful, healthy-looking child. He is not blue like your shirt, or even blue like a pale version of your shirt.
Yeah.
And he was eating and growing appropriately. And I said to my husband, the doctor said he'd call us in 2 weeks. It's now Friday at 5. I think we should call him. Like, I sort of don't have a great feeling about this, and I'm an eternal optimist, so I was aware that I wanted to pay attention to that sense. And my husband was like, if there's something wrong, the doctor calls. And I was like, just call. So Alan called the doctor, and he said, he answered it immediately. And he said, I've been staring at this phone all day, just unable to call you.
Oh, no.
Henry has a disease, it's rare. And it's called it's called Fanconi anemia.
Yes. Yeah.
Fanconi anemia is something we had never heard of.
No.
It turns out Alan and I are both carriers of it, but it wasn't something that could be tested for.
Screened, yeah.
So they did the screening. We didn't carry Tay-Sachs, and that was sort of all they could test for at the time. So he said, don't call anyone right now. This is pre-Google. This is 95.
Yeah.
He said, don't call anyone right now because whatever they tell you, it's going to be based on published research and it will be old
Yes.
and things are changing. But come into my office first thing in the morning. It was a Saturday morning and he opened his office to us. And we learned a cascade of horrifying information.
Yes. Yes.
Have you ever seen anyone with Fanconi
Yes.
anemia?
At Children's, when I actually did my rotations there,
Okay.
because we work in genetics, and
Yes.
that clinic takes in a lot of these rare and unusual, and part of medical education is to understand that.
Yeah.
So
Well, I meet doctors all the time now because of what I do for a living, and they'll say like, I remember talking about that for like 15 minutes in medical school, but I've never seen anyone with it.
Yeah.
yeah.
And essentially, and you know this, it causes a range of birth defects, usually different for the 1,000 people in the world who have it. So you're talking rare disease.
It's that rare.
It's that rare.
Really.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think rare diseases are diseases that affect like 250,000 people or less or something like that.
This is even more.
This is extremely rare,
Oh, wow.
which is why most people have never heard of it or anyone who has it. It's disproportionately a Jewish genetic disease. My husband and I are both of Ashkenazi Jewish descent. So 10% of the people with Fanconi anemia are Jewish, and Jews represent less than 1% of the population. So there are 10 times as many Jewish people with the disease as you would expect based on the population. And of course, at the time, I knew none of this, but it causes the birth defects. It leads to bone marrow failure and the need for a bone marrow transplant. And then if you're lucky enough to survive that, leads to a whole range of secondary cancers of the mouth and gynecological things and other things. And that was, I mean, the words that he used was fatal.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you're a young mom, 30 years old. This is your first
with a
child.
2-week-old baby, a
Yeah.
tiny little, at this point, maybe 5.5-pound baby. And it was like shocking and devastating in a way that like nothing in my life had ever been.
Yeah.
And same with my husband. We had been really fortunate.
Yeah.
So our life took a 90-degree turn forever.
Yeah. These are the things that, change you.
These are the things that change you. And you know what? I mean, right away, we basically made 3 decisions. One, we're not going to accept this Henry's fate without a fight.
Yeah.
Number 2, we're going to go find some doctors to help us because
Yeah.
as much as we might be energetic and filled with love and optimism, we don't have any medical knowledge or experience. So
Yeah.
we need to find some doctors who believe that they can change his fate. And we're going to help as many other kids
Yeah.
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 while
That's the
while
legacy.
we help Henry.
Yeah.
Because we're lucky. We live in D.C. There are great doctors here. We were fortunate enough to be educated. And we have a community of people who care about us. And not everybody has all those
Exactly.
resources
The
and
support.
assets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And by the way, while we're doing all that, we're going to live every day to its
Yep.
fullest. Like we're not taking anything for granted
That's right.
anymore.
Yeah.
And that latter part was actually the silver lining because so many of us can get wrapped up in the minutia of life,
Yes.
Easy to do.
the challenges of
Yes.
life, even just little frustrations, and like
Yeah. Yeah. My
Nevermore.
order's not here. Or, yeah. Right.
does
yeah.
not bother, like not very much bothers me.
Yeah.
Even COVID, like we had lived a life of masks and
Yeah.
isolation for
Far
many
before.
years.
Yeah.
And so I was like, we can do this.
When it comes to the imaging, just to sort of paint a picture, you talked about having this normal and abnormal heart put out in front of you. Visually speaking, whenever you had that described to you, what were those differences whenever you looked at that structure and said, okay, this is what it should look like, and this is what we are seeing in front of us?
I mean, that's a great question because if you look at pictures of children with Fanconi anemia, or you think about what would a child look like, a child with a fatal disease, I promise you, you're not picturing Henry Goldberg.
Yeah.
Henry, I have 2 other sons, Jack, who's now 25, will be 26 in a couple weeks, and Joe is 21. The 3 of them all resemble each other.
I've seen photos. They look
They
remarkably similar.
remarkably
Yes,
similar.
yeah.
So I think I didn't have experience in hospitals. Like I remember when I went in to give birth
Sure.
and they asked me like, when was my last hospitalization? And I was like, I don't know, April 4th, 1965. Like aside from stitches,
Yeah.
nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I didn't really know what life was like for children who have serious illnesses. And the fact is, they're just regular kids.
Yep.
They're just regular kids who have some really serious stuff they've got to tend to.
Right.
But so I think that's the best way to answer
Sure.
your question.
No, that's great.
You can't really tell the difference.
Yeah.
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 And, so with that, getting all of this information, in terms of how the physicians interacted with you, worked with, very early on with physicians that are very specialized and they have certain skill sets. But going through that process, all that information flooding you and the effect it has, meanwhile, you're trying to take care of Henry, right? It must have been, what was that experience like? Getting the information, asking the questions, because that experience is equally important as a physician, that relationship. What was that like?
So, one thing that I thought was so beautiful about the way the geneticist explained the illness was, yes, up until this point, it has been considered a fatal illness, but things are changing. Things are developing so quickly in the medical world.
Yeah.
So, he cracked the door open for a little bit of hope, and we ran right through it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I thought that was so sensitive of him because in a way, he was saying, you can actually change things because here you are.
Who was
And
that physician?
so Kenneth Rosenbaum, he was the head of genetics at Children's National at the time. He's not there anymore. But he had just the right amount of like gravity and professionalism, but also humanity.
Yes. Yeah.
Interestingly, there were no physicians in this area who had any experience with Fanconi anemia. And so we went up to New York. We went and found a physician, a hematologist at Hackensack University Medical Center in New Jersey. He had an expertise in Fanconi anemia. He saw dozens and dozens of kids. And so when we asked him, we were interviewing doctors because you know what? When you've got something rare, doctors want you as a patient.
That is true.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And when we asked him, where would you recommend Henry have his bone marrow transplant? His answer, and this is Dr. Al Gilio, still in Hackensack, he said, wherever they have the best success rates for the kind of transplant that Henry will have.
Yeah.
And we said,
Bingo.
you're hired.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't about ego or
Yes.
pride. It was about Henry.
Yes.
And, but again, like information was coming at us. We came to understand, obviously we're both carriers. Well, our siblings had to go get tested because guess what? My sister had a brand new baby who was born 3 days after Henry.
Yes.
They had no idea if she had Fanconi anemia. You couldn't look at either one of them and know.
Yeah. Right.
My brother's wife was 7 months pregnant with a baby. My husband's wife had a 1-year-old. I mean, so all of a sudden, the ripple effects were huge. Yeah. And I know we found out through testing that my mom was the carrier. Oh, wow. So then for all my cousins whose fathers were my mom's brother, they all had to get tested. And so, yes, the ripple effects and oh my God, I don't want to be like Laurie and Alan, and I don't want to have a Henry. And we're like, but he's so beautiful and precious, and we love him. And so, like, were they like us? They going to be different from us? I mean, everyone was sensitive and loving, but terrified.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And we started just talking to doctors, like, how can we change Henry's fate? What can we do? And sure enough, when he was 5 months old, he had just had his open heart surgery successfully. And the cardiac surgeon said to us when we were in Boston for his Boston Children's, he said, this is a plumbing repair. And we were like, easy for you to say, like, our child is going to be on a heart and lung machine.
Yes.
That doesn't sound like plumbing, but I mean, it was a horrible 5 hours.
Yes.
And actually, this might be interesting to your listeners, but one of the things that another mom whose child had open heart surgery said to me, she said, go up to the CICU, the cardiac intensive care unit, the day before Henry's surgery and look at other kids.
Yeah, you'll see. Yeah.
And you'll see what Henry's going to look like. And just absorb that, because seeing it initially just with your child will be so horrifying and so shocking. Yeah. And that was a great piece of advice, because it's like, okay, lying there in a sort of forced coma or medicine-induced coma with tubes running in and out of everywhere is actually what you're supposed to look like.
Yeah. But it's through that, like, that's where the fascination is in terms of support. Like, a physician wouldn't tell you to do that.
Of course not.
Somebody who is going through it like you would. And that's an important part of the journey.
Such an important part of the journey.
Yeah.
Because, you know what, physicians, people who work in hospitals, unless they've had a sick child, they actually don't know what's happening right before they came in the door and after they leave. No. And you're there for 24 hours, 7 days a week. There's a lot happening that you don't want to share with them, that they don't want to know about.
Yeah. Yeah.
But parents will convey those things to help prepare one another and support one another. when we came back from Boston, we were pregnant with my second son, Jack.
Wow.
Now that was scary. Why? Because this was a genetic disease.
Yeah.
And every child of ours had a 25% chance of having it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was a whole, like, immediately it's like, oh my gosh, we're pregnant. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
The stakes, like, we didn't, you might think, oh, well, a 75% chance of being lucky. But for us, 100% of our children had Fanconi anemia.
Yeah.
So we didn't feel so lucky.
Yeah.
And so I had to go through prenatal testing to see
What the result was.
what the result was. So I didn't know until I was 3 months pregnant.
Yep.
So there's another whole piece of this, which is, as I mentioned, Henry was going to have a bone marrow transplant. For his variety of Fanconi anemia, the survival rate was 0,
Oh my gosh.
absent a sibling donor.
Yeah.
Okay, the only people who can really be perfect matches
Our siblings.
are siblings with the same parents. Okay. So all of a sudden I'm pregnant and didn't know if the baby had Fanconi anemia, didn't know if the baby was healthy, didn't know if the baby was a perfect match and a savior for Henry. Had no idea. Henry's blood counts were healthy and normal then.
Yeah.
So we weren't desperate for a donor. We were desperate for a healthy baby.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the day I found out I was pregnant with Jack, we got a call from one of the doctors we had met with. And she said, what would you say if I told you you could knowingly get pregnant with a baby who is healthy, doesn't have Fanconi anemia, and is a perfect HLA match or stem cell donor for Henry?
Yeah.
And I was like, heck yeah.
Yes.
I didn't really say that, but I said a more
Excitement.
extreme version of that. But I said, you know what? I just found out I'm pregnant. And so we have to go through our testing. But if the baby's healthy, we're going to move forward. And then we want to have a third child anyway. So we want to sign us up.
Be sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that was when everything changed yet again, right? So 3 months later, we find out Jack's healthy. Thank God. Still healthy. Knocking on 26, knocking on 26
Bravo.
years.
Yes.
But not an HLA match. And that was perfectly fine. Henry was only 5 months old at the time, right? We had years before his predicted transplant. But we were the first in the world after Jack was born to try to use pre-implantation genetic diagnosis to have a baby.
Excellent.
Have you?
Excellent.
Do you know anyone who's done that?
No, I don't know anybody personally.
Okay.
He does now.
Now you do.
Great to meet you.
Now you do. You too. What they were talking about at the time, and so it's always in the context of history, right?
Yes.
At the time, IVF was maybe 20 years old. It's back in 1996 now. And what they were suggesting was I had had Henry naturally, I'd had Jack naturally, was to have me go through IVF. And instead of making 8 or 10 eggs, to make 30.
Yes.
So to taking a fertile person and putting them through IVF was a new thing.
Yes.
Why would you do that, right? So figuring out what is the right cocktail of medicine
Yes.
Right.
to put a healthy person through IVF
Yeah.
is totally different than what is the right cocktail of medicines for someone who's not fertile. And well, I suppose if there was male factor infertility, there was some of that.
Yes.
Okay.
Granted.
Then they would take the eggs out when they were ready. They would inseminate them with my husband's sperm in a lab. And then on day 3, which was when back then they always put the healthy embryos back in, or the most robust embryos, they would actually extract 1 or 2 cells from the 8-cell pre-embryo, put them in a test tube, and ship them from New York, where we were doing IVF, to Michigan, where they would do
the testing.
the single cell testing. And we did that 9 times
Oh, wow.
in 3 years.
Wow.
And I listen to people now talking about, I mean, I think Amy Schumer has been very public, like IVF is hell. Doing it 1 time, 2 times, 3 times is hell. So I had a son whose blood counts were starting to fall, and we were checking him every month. He was 1. I had a newborn baby who was healthy, and both of them needed a mom and a dad to care for them.
Yes.
And I was doing IVF 9 times.
9 times. Yeah.
Boom, 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 boom.
And just to clarify, that IVF was 9 times over the course of a single year?
No, 3 years.
3 years, okay.
You can't do it in a single year because it's a cycle.
It's a cycle. It takes time for those to process.
It takes time to prepare your body, to go through the shots. But I actually kept a log, and I had 353 injections
Oh my gosh.
in 3 years.
Yeah.
And all the while, we were living every day to its fullest, right? Because we were not taking for granted that either that would work,
Absolutely.
that Henry would have a chance to have a transplant if it didn't work, or that he would live past 5, which was his predicted age of transplant.
Yep.
People today say to me, "How did you do that?" I have no idea.
Well, what
didn't
choice
have a
did you have?
What choice did I have?
yeah.
1 day at a time is how I did. But no one knew about it. Okay. It was a well-kept secret, because you can imagine that anyone who had a fatal genetic disease and whose child needed a transplant would be banging on the doctor's doors.
Do anything.
But they didn't know what they were doing yet. So they would, why did it not work 9 times? Because they would test those cells and get no results, or get inconclusive results, or we would have, a number of healthy, robust embryos, none of which were a match. And the only ones that were healthy and a match were the worst quality embryo, which is usually all that you're looking for.
Yeah.
It was a game of statistics and probability and
Rolling the dice.
with our children's lives.
Yeah. That's a lot to go through and a lot to process over 3 years. And you have Henry, now you have Jack. It's, I applaud you in part because as a physician, it's understanding, the drive that a patient has. In healthcare now, there's a certain sense of being passive to things. You playing an active role in your health, the health of a loved one, is critical.
Of course.
It's not just to, just go through the motions of it, because you only got 1 shot.
You only have 1 shot.
Yeah.
And the opportunities are going to come from you, not to you,
Yes. Yeah.
for the most part.
And that's a very important point. And that's the thing that I really think viewers should try to really wrap their heads around, that it is being active which makes all the difference. And, whether it's even just a simple thing like, I need to lose a little weight. It is formative about your life, and it is about a matter of character. That, and I think that's the problem when I go to other countries and I see their healthcare system. It's that relationship and how people are not passive. They're questioning these things. And then I was like, well, that's not good enough.
Right. There's got to be a better way. There's got to be something you can do.
Always.
Let's talk about it. Let's talk, let's be part of the team.
It's worth it. Yeah. Yeah.
You made a statement about, you I think throughout this journey have expressed that you had excellent care throughout. You had people who were curious and willing to help. And there is an interesting point here, because I think from some of the practitioners that we've spoken to, it's a situation where sometimes a complex medical case, given the current status of where healthcare is in the United States, a complex medical case to someone who's in that space might be like, I'm almost like afraid to touch this because I don't know how it will reflect on them professionally, or if they may have something that they run up against that they can't overcome as far as an obstacle. It sounds like you had individuals throughout this who are saying, I'm going to rise to meet this challenge. I'm curious, from both of your perspectives, has that been maybe a shift in the medical system in the United States, where you have people who would otherwise be really curious and eager to jump on and say, I'm going to help you A to Z? versus today. And it's also something we spoke to Trina Ulrich.
Yes.
That's right. And Trina talked about how some of her individual friends who are more in the naturopathic space, a lot of times naturopaths get tossed cases that other people won't touch. And so they're almost like they're almost like more prepared to say, oh, I've seen this before. I'm ready to take it on.
Well, and I would say for the specialists that you had, they were trained. That's why
Yeah.
it made them unique in the sense, because there's probably only a handful in the entire world. And there's a lineage in terms of the training that a physician goes through. And, they didn't just read it in a textbook,
Right. I mean, this what we with this small group of doctors hand-picked the best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because this was, I mean, we were way out on the scientific frontier.
Yeah.
This had never been done before. There was nothing written about it. No one even imagined the possibility of it, except for this tiny little group.
Yeah.
And it didn't work for us, right? But there was another couple who knew we were doing it. They had a child with the same disease, and they went to another doctor and said, this is what they're doing. Can't you do this?
Yeah.
And it worked. They figured it out. And it was a New York Times Magazine cover story
Yeah.
with Henry, which is what happens when it doesn't work, and this little girl, Molly, what happens when it does. And Nightline did a story about our family after the New York Times Magazine story. And then I started to serve on genetics and ethics panels. And the first time, the head of President Bush's stem cell advisory group basically said, like, parents will willy-nilly do whatever to save their kid. They shouldn't be part of the conversation. And I got up and I said,
Little laughable
like,
there.
if not us, who?
Right.
Yeah.
Like these developments can't just be done by physicians. They need a patient partner.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. So much of what we learn is because of those, we'll have other histories like Henrietta Lacks,
Yes,
she contri-
exactly.
those things are not, that is, where we rest on the backbone of those. And,
Absolutely. And I didn't realize that at the time. Okay, so when I said, of course I'll do this, and I was putting my body through so much, of course I had to believe it was going to work and save Henry's life.
Yes.
It didn't really occur to me that all of us are the beneficiaries of people who have made sacrifices before us
For centuries. Yeah.
for centuries, whether it's about, transportation safety, food safety, medical safety, everything, right?
Yeah.
And so this was my thing that I gave
Yeah.
to others. And you know what? After that New York Times Magazine story ran, I got letters from families who said, I read that story and I talked to my doctor and my son Hunter is alive because of Henry.
Yeah.
That's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah. That's goosebumps.
Yeah.
What's the point of being here on the planet?
Yeah.
But to help others,
Yeah.
True.
right?
Yeah, we lift each other up, and
We do.
by doing that, I would say that the training that these specialists had, it would be fascinating to dig in and learn more about that, where things are not just factory work. It wasn't like, oh, here's another tetralogy of Fallot and just move through it. It takes a part of you. For those physicians who practice the art of medicine, you are all in,
Correct.
and if you're not, you go on to the next doctor
Yes.
who is.
Exactly. And you know what? Here's the thing. Pediatric hematologists and oncologists, they're seeing kids die
Yes. Yeah.
way too often. And so they're desperate. And people who work with rare diseases,
Yes.
same thing. They're desperate to stop seeing that,
Yeah.
to do what they can,
Yeah. Yeah.
because they're seeing it up close. Maybe
If-
not every day,
if
hopefully.
you can
but
help just one.
if you can help just one. And if you can help just one, maybe you can help a whole bunch of others, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Have you had an opportunity to meet with Molly and her family and build a relationship in that capacity?
So I've met them. They actually, Henry's transplant was going very poorly at University of Minnesota Children's when Molly arrived, and Molly's transplant went really beautifully. So we actually were there at the same time and spent some time with them. Although, you know, you're in transplant rooms, like there's not a lot of interaction.
Right.
You're really isolated on those floors, but we would see them occasionally in the lounge. And we kept in touch a little bit, but I've met other families. There's a family in Israel who we introduced to our doctors, and they had a little daughter who saved their son's lives. Now they're up both in their 20s. They were little kids at the time. Obviously, the daughter was a newborn baby, and the son was just a few years old. And we do keep in touch with them closely, and so and with all of the doctors.
I think it would be hard to follow in your footsteps. But what would be some things you would want to like share? Like, what would you say to those who are going, you know, through something like this? What would be some things if you were to step back and say, hey, wait a minute, this is what matters?
I would say one of the things that occurs to me when you ask the question is to live a life absent regret.
Exactly.
Okay, so like when Henry died, we just never thought he was going to die. His doctors did not think he was going to die because he was so happy and courageous and dynamic and like literally made you think anything was possible. Okay, I mean he loved Batman and he always had a Batman shirt or Batman sneakers or Batman costume on, and it's like this kid is a superhero, right? And somehow or another they always survive, right? But after he died, and you know, it's something that is extremely hard to survive. But
Of course,
at this point, we had 2 other children, and we had each other, and we had Henry's legacy to tend to, and so we were determined to survive, and we have. It's 20 years now.
Yes. Yeah.
But it was great, like that whole living every day and not taking things for granted. Like I was able to get to a place where Henry had the very best life that a child with Fanconi anemia could possibly have.
Yeah.
Like he had 7, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it, like 7 incredible years.
Yeah.
He didn't even know he was sick. And he wasn't a dummy.
Yeah.
He just was like on the path to super duper better.
Yeah.
Sometimes he was further along and sometimes he was less far along. But like it was all like a game and a magical childhood. And so like in my rawest moments, looking back and saying, I was the very best mother that Henry could have had. And Alan was the best father. And Jack and Joe were phenomenal brothers. He had, you don't really get to have a great life usually with Fanconi anemia, but he did. It was just way, way, way too short.
Living every day. Yeah. And that's inspiring. I mean, that's part of the sense of, you know, unless you're in it, you don't know it. And how, you know, people react to these things, you know, in different ways. You know, everybody, you know, some people will submit themselves to it and others, you know, won't. And, you know, I think that's important for anyone to really kind of go through that. I think it would be important to, you know, have this journey that we're learning from you and be able to explore it more in ways like what you are doing now. Hope for Henry was established. When was it established?
In 2003.
Okay.
So we're in our 20th year.
That's fantastic. Awesome. Yeah.
Henry died December of 2002. We started the organization October 25th on his birthday in 2003.
Fantastic.
What would have been his 8th birthday.
Fantastic. And so what in that 20-year period, what has that journey been like in terms of Hope for Henry, what you are doing and you're reaching out? I understand that you've done quite a bit. And I think it's important for people to hear this.
Yeah, I mean, people contact me now and they're looking at me and I run a $2 million nonprofit and we're in 31 hospitals and they're like, oh, how did you do that? Like, I don't see how I could ever get my organization there. And I say, hold on a minute. This did not happen overnight.
20
like
years.
This took tenacity and persistence and patience, which is not my strong suit, and just drive.
Yeah.
and love. I mean, it was so much work. And not everyone needs to do that. You know, I mean, I happen to have had a nonprofit background and a management background. So, and I was a writer and I did events like in my career. Because it turns out, you know,
You had all the tools you needed.
when you're this
To make
old,
this happen,
you've I think I've been like tri-vocational, right? And so I was able to put all of those experiences and skills to bear to build a business. Because a nonprofit's a business. It's just a business that puts its proceeds back into the business, not our pockets. And so we started with a mission, which was to essentially improve the lives of chronically ill kids, through, at the time, entertaining distractions and other things, right? And we started off literally saying, there was a gap in the care Henry received. We got great medical care all over the country.
Yeah.
I mean, for 2.5 years, we were everywhere. Wherever, if we even dared to like go to the beach, we ended up at BB Medical Center. If we dared to go wherever, I mean, holding IV bags out the car windows, you know, to drain the last bit out and end up in a
Keep it
hospital
moving.
somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And we knew that that we're lucky here in the U.S. Most people can get good medical care, but it takes so much more than medicine
Oh, yes.
to
Absolutely.
heal people. I mean, you understand that.
Understand it very well.
And so what we set out to do was to deal with all the more than medicine.
Yeah. The gaps.
Okay, the gaps.
Yeah.
And quality of life, hopefulness, optimism, normalcy, ensuring that you don't just become a patient because you have a patient ID, but you're still a kid.
Yes.
And you're a kid first.
Those directly affect the outcome
Of
that people
course.
have
Of
in a bigger
course.
way than a lot of people realize, I think.
Absolutely. And so when we started out, we were like, okay, we want to make kids happy and we want to bring normalcy. And so we started giving them gifts of entertainment like portable DVD players, which 20 years ago was a novelty. Now it's like, oh, you can get those like for 25
I don't even think you can get them anymore.
You probably can't get them anymore, right? Now everyone
Yeah,
has the
Walkman or
iPhones
something.
and
Yeah.
iPads. But yeah, we gave kids Game Boy Advances, digital cameras, XM satellite radios, and
wow.
portable DVD players. All of those things were hundreds and hundreds of dollars, right? Now they don't exist. And then we started throwing birthday parties for kids in the hospital. And then we brought in superheroes and professional athletes and authors and movie premieres and really like robust year-round programming that made them feel like kids and improved their coping and reduced their anxiety and made it a more kid-friendly environment. And about 7 years ago, I said like, okay, that's great. We're doing this. We are at 4 hospitals, Cleveland Clinic Children's, Sinai Hospital Baltimore, Children's National, MedStar, Georgetown. But I don't want to just make kids happy. I actually want to change their outcomes, to your point, okay? And so I want to push further. And I remembered something that we did for Henry. So when we got to his transplant room, he had just won the trophy in his soccer league. He had just like had a big superhero party with everybody who knew him and loved him. He had just said bye to his girlfriend and his best friends. And we got in a car and we went to Minnesota. Like the sky was the limit for him. And all of a sudden his Technicolor world shrunk down to an 8x10 black and white room filled with beeping equipment. There was nothing Henry in that room.
Yeah.
So I was like, we painted a huge bat signal on the window saying like, Batman, like, come hither.
Yeah.
We need some help. And then I said, oh, I think there's a magic closet in the corner. I bet you if you let them put that peripheral IV in or you get that round of chemo, there will be a Batman action figure for you in that closet. Henry loved Batman. He would do anything for a Batman action figure. And over the years, he amassed a collection of hundreds of Batman action figures. And in exchange, he would get gut biopsies and liver biopsies and peripheral IVs and blood tests and you name it. Everything went wrong.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, he was always on the path to super duper better, right? And so I challenged my child life specialist who was on my team and I said, how do we bring that magic closet to kids around the country? And we created a game called Hope for Henry's Super Path to Super Duper Better. Okay? And we were paying kids in Hope for Henry bucks to do whatever was challenging for them. So they would adhere to their game board stickers that showed a superhero getting chemotherapy, a superhero doing OT, occupational therapy, physical therapy, a superhero eating, or whatever their challenges were. And they would tell us how many bucks they wanted to do that thing and what they were saving for. So kids started trying to earn 1,000 Hope for Henry bucks to get a huge Lego set, or to meet their favorite athlete, or to get signed memorabilia, or have a song written for them, whatever. Everyone chose different things. And it was so successful that we expanded to 10 hospitals.
Excellent.
And then those people came back to us and said, we need to help kids get through procedures, MRIs, port access, PICC line placements. So that super path was for kids with cancer and kids going through transplant. What about kids who are just coming in for an MRI and are terrified and need to be sedated when really they probably don't need to be sedated?
Yeah.
So we built super rewards for super kids. So we use super a lot.
Yeah.
Superheroes,
Super duper.
super duper. And now we have pathways that we've built on game boards for 16 medical procedures. I mean, everything from basic things like vaccines and sutures and blood draws to MRIs, proton therapy, EEGs, lumbar punctures, like common scary stuff.
Yeah.
And kids get to put stickers on that show every step that they're going to have to take to complete the procedure. And then they put I did it stickers on. And then they visit our rewards cart, which has Kendra Scott jewelry and Lids baseball caps for their local teams, Lego sets, superhero action figures,
Right. Yeah.
etc. And we're finding that kids are reporting a 95% improvement in their patient experience.
Yeah. And that when there is that, then they can be healthier.
Correct.
Because your immune system and everything, your drive, all of that is affected.
Builds off
by
that
it.
resilience,
Other
right?
than, just being stuck in an 8x10 room with all the
It's not
beeping.
a place to heal.
No.
Well, you included a few metrics in your submission, and I just wanted to read those off because you talk about 95%. Doesn't get much better than that.
Right.
So you had indicated here 72% reduction in use of sedation, 90% improvement in patient adherence, 85% reduction in anxiety, 88% improvement in coping skills, and 98% improvement in overall patient experience. I mean, those are all insane numbers.
Incredible.
Yeah.
And this is the thing. There's safety issues embedded in there. There are quality of life issues, cost issues, trauma, avoidance of trauma.
Yeah. I can guarantee you, even though those kids, as they even become adults, the experience will be very different. Because I remember a patient who had, as a child, traumatic oral surgery. You had to put this 50-year-old man to sleep to even get close to his teeth.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
No, that trauma,
That's true.
It carries with you.
it carries with you. Here's the thing. We see that with vaccinations, right? I mean, vaccine hesitancy, separate from political resistance, okay?
Yes, right.
But just needle phobia
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe.
is pervasive.
Yes. Yeah.
And parents who are needle phobic are less likely to vaccinate their kids, or they're less likely to vaccinate their kids on time.
Correct.
That is born from traumatic childhood experiences, most likely.
And that's where healthcare, and being impersonal is at fault.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that we just accept it. You take action and make a social change.
Correct.
And that's where the contract is. Social contracts are extremely important, and understanding the long-term effect.
Right.
Yeah. And the gamification of this whole process is so ingenious.
Right on point.
Yeah.
It's so smart because that's the easiest way to change social behavior is you make it something that is it's easier for people to follow along with. And I wanted you to touch just a little bit on the research for that because now with all of the marketing tools that are out there, I mean, stuff is dialed in. I mean, we can probably say something and I'll get an ad for it on the computer later. So when it came to your research process for figuring out how can we best reach these children, obviously you had your own experience to base that on, but who else were you collaborating with? Who else were you reaching out to make sure that it was dialed in?
That's a great question. So we have a Child Life team of innovators. So Child Life specialists are that profession isn't very well known or widely known, but they essentially are by the bedside in the hospital, and they're trained in a combination of child development and hospitalization for kids, right?
Sure.
So they combine what is
Social, yeah.
like sort of psychosocial interventions for the kids. And so we have a team of innovators that has 16 child life specialists from leading hospitals around the country. We have a parent advisory council and a patient advisory council. And we also have 3 full-time child life specialists on my staff.
Oh, wow.
And so we work collaboratively to determine which procedures are most frightening and what are the steps that are universal, whether you're inpatient or outpatient at a freestanding children's hospital or a, pediatric office. There are standard steps for all these procedures.
Absolutely.
And the game boards are built with all those steps and some blank stickers in case there's something unique that happens in a particular facility. They can fill it in. But it's been extraordinary. And we started the year with 14 hospital partners. We're at 31. Last week I was in Ohio. Hospital 32's coming on board.
That's awesome.
And our goal is to be at 50 next year and 100 over 3 years.
Fantastic. That's
100 hospitals.
Yeah. That's great.
That's incredible.
I mean, even for myself, it's just kind of like this experience, even taking it from Hope for Henry, but then moving it past, it's about that experience, right? And so you're making that experience and you're changing it completely to what, I will say that the institutional of medicine takes away the person.
It does.
And giving it back to them is important. I mean, even for adults, I'll be honest. The number of men who need colonoscopies, if we could just give them something to please do this.
Yes.
But if you start at a young age, then you've completely changed it. Rather than avoidance, then they're actively engaged. And
That's
I think I can guarantee you the outcomes for those younger children who have medical conditions that require that level of intensity. I can guarantee as an adult, they're very different.
Yeah.
I'll tell you something, Dr. Brown. When I go to a conference and I speak, the first hands that go up, and there's far more medical practitioners who deal with adults than there are with kids because there are many more adult patients. The first hands that go up are people who say, can you do this, make this available to adults as well? Because
we're children too,
we're children.
basically.
I mean, we're just bigger
Some
children.
of us never grow up.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. It's, medicine is an art, and it is, even for Hippocrates, it was a sense of service to your community. And I think healthcare for me in the United States has become so depersonalized, and the investment that, I come to this as relationship, and those who know me know I'm all in, and if the patient is all in, we're going to get there,
Yes.
May not be easy, but together, and that's where there's a certain sense of reward for me.
Yes, of course.
Because I didn't just become a physician to sit in a box and then just factory work, right? And I can say that these physicians, these specialists that you worked with are cut from a different stone. And, we would hope, that those, if those stories aren't captured, then they're gone, right?
That's right.
So maybe we'll have an opportunity to kind of follow along and maybe explore some of these things at some point.
Yeah, that'd be great.
On your coattails. I'd love to just see you. I have
I'm a crazy person.
I have a certain sense that you have a high level of energy.
I do have a high
and it's
level of
infectious. I
energy.
think that would be fantastic for people to see too.
Yeah.
Because we have to be like this. Every day is special. Every day is an opportunity to live.
Yes.
And you did that with Henry.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's glorious.
And the other two too.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Joel has been out.
Joe's fantastic.
Yeah.
I think his creative eye and he's got, I think you've instilled with him in many ways, just like you did with Henry and Jack. He's got this conquer the world attitude.
Yes, he does.
Yep.
And that's so important as
You
an
can't
artist.
stop that. You can't
Yeah.
stop that.
You
Yeah.
can't.
As an artist, that's a key element in finding success or choosing a different career.
Exactly.
Because he's definitely got that, and I'm eager to meet up with him again. He's great.
He feels the same way. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Well, one of the most important things is the story doesn't stop here. So we want to be able to kind of continue this. We would love to explore and take viewers on this experience so that they can see for themselves. We can sit here in the podcast and just talk about it, but nothing better than getting in the weeds, get our hands dirty. But very important for those viewers who are very interested in Hope for the Henry and how they may be able to interact with you, be able to provide support, anything. Can you provide a little bit more for the viewers?
Yeah, so we have a great website, which is www.hopeforhenry.org. So it's a nonprofit, so it's .org. And there's so much information about all of our programs. You can meet some of the patients that we've served and find out how to volunteer and get involved. And if people are interested in supporting our work, you can donate directly from the website.
Okay.
And I'm happy to hear from anyone who's interested. And my email's easy. It's Laurie@hopeforhenry.org.
Fantastic.
LAURIE.
And if we get comments from viewers, then certainly we'll share those.
Okay.
And well, let's keep it moving.
Yeah.
Story doesn't stop, and
doesn't
certainly the story for Henry has never ended.
Yes.
So that's fantastic.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So thanks for tuning in on this episode of Earnest Medicine with Laurie Strongin. As she mentioned, she has a lot of contact information that we'll be providing viewers in the description, also on the screen, so you can follow along with her journey and Henry's journey and his legacy. So thank you again for tuning in. We're signing off on this episode of Earnest Medicine.
Thank you.
And if you happen to find any of this interesting, or more importantly, if you want to collaborate, check out the link below so that you can send us your comments, any stories you may have, anything. We're happy to entertain it. And this is really about us going on a journey together.